Alrighty. I'm assuming I'm on. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm Gabe Bartholow, and I'm going to be doing an Israel presentation. Um, I guess I just want to first start off and say thank you to everyone here at FBC for getting me to Israel. I wouldn't have been able to do it without the financial aid and the giving that you guys did. So I really appreciate that, and I just want to say thank you because I wouldn't be doing this presentation if it wasn't for you guys. Also, it's Father's Day, so I should probably go ahead and say Happy Father's Day to all the dads in the room. Papaw, Happy Father's Day, and to my dad, who's not able to be here, but I'm sure he'll watch online, Happy Father's Day. I honestly wouldn't be here if it wasn't for the men in my life, Papaw, Dad, my grandpa.
That's your friends.
Okay. So, yeah. So let's go ahead and get into the presentation. Our trip was May 16th through the 28th, and Pastor Randy, or Dr. Randall Smith, as the technical term I guess would be to call him. We went through his Christian Travel Studies program, which is the travel organization that he does all of his tours through. And I was able to go, thankfully, as again, because of Fellowship Bible Chapel, to go to the school that he runs, Great Commission Bible Institute, and study through all 1,189 chapters in a year, which was an amazing experience. And there's the Israeli flag. And I should go ahead and give a preface. Some of you guys met Janae. So most of these pictures are actually hers. I was writing notes. She was taking pictures. So I'm not actually this good of a photographer. These are her pictures. So go ahead and give a shout out there. So the first thing we did, obviously it's like a 12 to 14 hour flight depending on how things work out. And it felt like a forever flight. We got there, we landed, and the first place we went to was this Neot Kerumim. Yeah, I'm not very good at pronouncing the Hebrew things, so bear with me on that. But it's a nature reserve, and we studied the plants of the Bible. It was really interesting just to kind of see some of the stuff, the meanings, how certain things kind of played in. So that was interesting. This right here was kind of the first thing we saw. We got off the bus, we walked out, and it was just kind of the first glimpse of Israel outside of the airport and bus that I got to see. And the top right for you guys it's a mosaic. It doesn't really have any biblical significance as far as the historicity of it, but it's a Jewish calendar. And so I thought that was pretty neat. Has all the Hebrew calendar months, but then it also on the outside, which you can't really see, it has the Gregorian calendar months as well. And then in the bottom right is what would have been an olive press, how they did it back then. And then the last thing we did, because our first day was kind of a lighter day because of the flight, we went to Joppa, which if you guys remember the story of Acts 10, it's Peter and his vision. He's sitting there, and I'll get into that in a second. But Joppa was actually designed when Joshua, and during the era of Joshua, the new groundbreaking technology of that day was the battering ram. And so they started building cities on hills, because if you have to hit a battering ram like this, for one, it's a lot harder to swing it up, and it doesn't have the impact if it's going like this as it does when you hit directly on. So Joppa is built on a hill for that reason. And then the ships at the time of Peter, the sails were four-cornered sheets. And so, as we see in the vision in Acts 10, Cornelius' vision as it's called, Peter is sitting in Joppa, which is on a port, looks down over a port on the Mediterranean. And how the vision goes is he falls into a trance or some type of dream state, I guess. And he sees this sheet fall down with all of the unclean food items, non-kosher food items, and Peter refuses to eat it. And the principle that comes from that is that God determines who and what is clean and unclean. And so the takeaway from that in Acts 15 at Jerusalem Council, James determines that salvation is opened up to not only the Jews, but also the Gentiles. So this was the beginning of the opening of the salvation to the Gentiles, which is pretty important because I'm pretty sure most everyone in here is not Jewish, is Gentile. So because of this happening, we get to take part in the gift of salvation, which I think is pretty cool, personally. And then day 2, we stayed at a hotel in Tel Aviv that night, and then we woke up, and the first place we went was Caesarea Maritima. And I think we're going to do this in 2 weeks. I think this is going to be a part 1. And so I'll talk a little more about the actual educational part of things. This week is going to be more of this is what we did, in the sense of what we saw, and then next week will be more of what we learned. But just kind of give you a preview of next week. This day we were learning of the 4 conflicts in the background of the gospel. And so Caesarea Maritima, I believe, was the political conflict in the background. And so this was the theater. It was pretty cool. Obviously, back when Jesus was around, they didn't have these black chairs or fancy stage equipment. But it was really neat to see. We walked down into, I'm going to kind of try to avoid my fence area here, but down up right actually in the very front row. And then these people that are off to the right of the picture on the stage, you can't see it in this picture, but back in here, there was a whole group of people, and they were singing. I believe they were singing in Spanish, but they were singing hymns. And it was really cool. It was kind of this first awkward distraction that we went through in our touring. And Pastor Randy, he was making a point. He finished it, and then he kind of established this saying, I guess, for the trip, which was whenever God wants you to hear something, that's when you'll be the most distracted. And he said, don't get it wrong. These people are celebrating that Jesus has changed their lives, yet it's a distraction to you because you're trying to hear me. So just focus in. So he finished up his point, and then we sat there and listened. And I mean, it was a group of probably 40 to 50 people that were just excited to see how Jesus had changed their lives. And that was really one of the coolest things about this trip, is people over there are excited about their faiths, because there's really no atheists in Israel. You have Jews, Muslims, and Christians, and they're all excited about their faith. So it was kind of neat to see how and I'll talk about this more when we get to Jerusalem, but there's kind of in all of Israel this spiritual tension that you can kind of feel when you get off the plane. It's hard to explain other than to say you just kind of have to go and experience it for yourself. But it was interesting because in America, we don't have that. We're kind of a spiritually dead nation, honestly, I guess, compared to Israel. So it was neat to see how people are excited about their faith. And while, unfortunately, 2/3 of the groups that I listed are wrong, to see the Christians who are excited and happy that Jesus has changed their lives, they're not walking around going, oh, I hope I don't offend anybody with my Christianity. They're singing hymns in the streets. So I thought that was neat. This was some of the columns, I guess, the tops of the columns from all the different eras. I thought was kind of neat. This was coming up on a palace that one of the Herods, I can't remember which one, stayed in. And then obviously the Mediterranean Sea. And actually, as I'm talking, I'm going to try to see if I can find that. This is back in the background is a continuation of the city that, or Caesarea Maritima, but this was more of the harbor area and well, I'm pointing at my computer. You guys can't see that. So back here is more of the harbor area, back in here, and then off to the top right of the picture was the chariot racing stadium. And then, like I said, one of the Herods, and then also Pontius Pilate stayed at this palace before it was destroyed in 638 by the Islamic invasions. And then a couple miles up the road is the aqueducts for this city, which is really neat to see. And then I didn't have the picture. It is? Oh, I thought you were saying they were. No, they're not. They've so in this picture, basically back where the cabinet is, it's not there anymore. So I got the picture where it kind of looks like it is still there, but no, it's not functioning anymore. So then after that night, we went to Nazareth, which is a beautiful city. Now, in Jesus' day, it was just a podunk little small town. I don't know if any of you know where Asheville is, but that's where I'm from. And Asheville, the description of Asheville kind of reminds me of what Pastor Andy described as Nazareth in Jesus' day. So I kind of had that connection. Obviously now it's no small little city. It's been made pretty popular considering Jesus, that whole thing. So in Nazareth, we went to the Church of the Annunciation, and underneath of it is these 3-room style cave homes, which is really interesting. How many of you guys have heard or seen heard or seen that Jesus was born in a barn and laid in a nice little wooden basket with straw? That's not at all what it was. How it worked is when it says that there was no room in the inn, that's actually a horrible translation of the term. How these 3-room style cave homes worked is you had your front room, which was your living room, your bedroom, your dining room, anywhere that wasn't the kitchen, basically, and bathroom. Then the room after that would have been your kitchen area and some storage. And then in the back, in the winter, you would bring not just in the winter. In the back, you would bring in your animals, and that was your stable. And so in your stable, you also had mangers where they would eat out of. So when it says there's no room in the inn, what it actually means is there was no room in the front area where everyone slept. So they sent them to the back where at least they would have a place to put the baby in the manger. So I thought that was really interesting because it kind of, the I guess, conflict that we discussed here was that Jesus didn't have an easy childhood. He was born in the back of a cave and laid in a feeding trough. We dress it up now as in American culture that he was born in this nice little barn and it was nice outside and there were animals there and, people brought presents and, some of that's kind of true, but at the same time, it wasn't necessarily the happiest of times. I mean, yes, our Savior was born and that is extremely exciting, but at the same time, to be Mary and Joseph, they're in a cave with this kid that is supposed to be the Messiah, but it's a tough situation to be in. And then this is the Church of the Annunciation. So below that is with the cave home that I just showed you. And these churches are all really nice and beautiful architecture. I mean, as you can see, but I don't know. A part of me wishes that they wouldn't build churches on top of everything that they think. It's like, this is where Jesus was born. All right, put a church on top of it. That'll, so we can, it's like, I want to see that's where Jesus was born. I'd kind of like to see that, not your big church. So, I don't know. That's my rant, I guess. And this was the door. I'm not going to remember all of these, but each column or section in the door tells a story, and I can't even see. Well, you guys can't see it. It's kind of hard to see, but on the right, I honestly can't tell if you guys can see, but there's Jesus on the cross. And then I believe this right here is when they left Jesus in Jerusalem, where they were riding, and then they realized that they he wasn't with them, so then they had to go back. But it was just kind of a neat picture, some more of the architecture. This is where they think Jesus was born. So I didn't go down. A bunch of people lined up. I thought, I can see it from here. No sense in standing in line. So I took the picture from there. Then we went to Mount Carmel and looked down over the valley of Megiddo, which was pretty neat. So this is just some more of the pictures. We actually went to what was a monastery at one point, and they're like in their building, which is now more or less a gift shop. They have on the roof a panoramic view, and so that's where these pictures are taken from, and it was absolutely beautiful to look down into the valley of Megiddo and see this. And then we know that this is where one of the most anticlimactic war battles in history will ever be fought, that the nations of the world will line up against Israel, and God will come down, or Jesus will come down, he'll breathe on them, and they'll all die. Which is really interesting, because I was standing there and just picturing if it were to happen today, all the tanks and the infantry and just all that, and then Jesus just coming down and breathing on them, and they all just fall over dead. It's hard to wrap your mind around, I guess, but it was, I guess, to be there and see that this is where this is going to happen was kind of interesting. Also, this right here is where Pastor Randy says that the Battle of Gideon happened, and then there was also, that's also where Saul would have fought the Philistines at the end of 1 Samuel, when he thought it was going to be Gideon part 2, and then he got overrun and fell on his sword and eventually died, and then the Philistines got him and hung him on a wall. So I thought that was kind of cool. And then we went to Sepphoris, which we looked at the Roman homes, and this was actually, I really liked this. We discussed Hebrews a little bit, of all things. And we got kind of a look at what the Roman homes looked like. And so this picture right here is the triclinium. So you have your atrium, which is outside, and that's kind of your public area. Think front porch, but fancier. And then your triclinium is like your living room, I guess, would be a good living room, dining room area. And like I said, the triclinium was private. This is my bad drawing of the, I guess, diagram of what Pastor Randy described. Now, if you see at the very top on the left and right, I have bench, that says bench. If you were really like popular or rich or a political figure, you had benches out front, because benches mean people have to wait to see you. So I thought that was kind of funny. And so what we discussed is actually when you would want money or to discuss anything with a political figure, they would actually have these masks behind them. Back where the bench was, right here behind them, there would be these masks of all of their deceased family members, called the cloud of witnesses. And so you would say, I need $500 for the example of them. And so he would say, okay. And they would go through this process where you and the government official would agree before the cloud of witnesses on that amount of money or whatever it is you need. So in Hebrews, when it says the cloud of witnesses, that's the imagery they get. Family is a very important thing in that day. And so that was the image that the writer in Hebrews used to kind of draw that connection. So I thought that was really neat to kind of see that that's what the cloud of witnesses is because family is a very important thing to them. You take Gentiles who are Romans, who are family is a huge importance to them, and you say that family doesn't matter anymore. These Hebrews, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, that's your family. So to see these fathers of the faith, that was very important to them because otherwise they just didn't have family anymore. So that was one of the coolest things that I kind of like could draw a connection to. The Sea of Galilee, this is a picture, I believe, from Mount Arbel looking down onto the Sea of Galilee. I could be wrong on that. I don't remember where exactly all these pictures were taken from, but I do know that's the Sea of Galilee. This is Mount Arbel, which was one of the coolest, I guess, sightseeing spots. I was one of the brave ones that actually climbed down on this little area right here. There was only like 3 of us that would do it, but it was worth it for the picture. And then so what we did when we were on Mount Arbel is we actually, I'm going to go back to this picture real quick, is we sat up here on this mountain and we actually charted out all of the areas around the Sea of Galilee. And so what we did, I've got my notebook here, I'm going to see if I can find it real quick. It was so that as we toured the Sea of Galilee for the next couple days, we could actually kind of see and know where we were, what we were looking at, and just things like that. But it was really neat to do it sitting on top of this mountain overlooking the Sea of Galilee. So here it is. This is kind of our chart. I don't know if they'll be able to see it on the live stream, but all of this writing in here was stuff we did sitting on Mount Arbel. And so that was really neat. So then, yeah, just some more pictures. Once again, I'm one of the brave, some might say dumb ones. Mom, if you watch this, I don't think I showed you that picture. Sorry. But yeah, so yeah, good pictures, good stuff to see. Capernaum. Capernaum was by far my favorite spot, I guess, spiritually. Because this is where Jesus did a ton of his ministry. And so we actually sat, and I'll give a plug for next week, because this is going to be one of the big things I talk about. Pastor Randy discussed communion, because Peter lived at his mother-in-law's house, which, if you know the way that things worked then, that wasn't normal. Men didn't go to their in-laws. The process of the Jewish wedding was you went and you added on to your dad's house, and then you went and got her and brought her back. And so because of that, Pastor Andy discussed communion in a way that I had never heard it taught, and it was really, really interesting. And you'll just have to wait and come back next week to hear how that works. But yeah, it's on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee, and it's a beautiful town. This was Peter's mother-in-law's neighbor's house. Neighbor's house because they built a church on top of Peter's mother-in-law's house, because they built a church on top of everything. So in order to see how their houses would have looked back then, Pastor Andy took us to her neighbor's house. And all of these, are just different rooms. These houses were big because it was made for a whole family. So imagine you, your kids, your parents, and your sisters and brothers and sisters and their family. Your whole family lives in one house. I don't want to imagine that, personally. I love my family to death, but if I had to live with all of them, we might go insane. This was just some more of the excavations, some homes, some walls. It's kind of hard to distinguish, personally, for me, what exactly all of this stuff was. Pastor Randy can look at it and tell you what exactly each rock is and the significance of it. I can't remember all of that stuff. I do know that this is a synagogue. Was. The darker rock down here at the bottom is actually what they call in situ, which means that that's actually the rock that was there. This lighter stuff was added on later, not in modernity recently, but it was, so the darker stuff was the original synagogue, and then people came in and knocked it down, and then they rebuilt it, and then once they excavated it, they found it, and they said, okay, this was the original, this was the add-on later, and so that's kind of, I guess, how that works. The Mount of Beatitudes, I don't have a ton of pictures from here because it's about all there is to see. It's a mountain that you look down on, But the cool thing about the Mount of Beatitudes, because it says that Jesus was sitting on a hillside talking to a large group of people, and it's like, okay, they didn't have microphones or sound systems. How would they have all heard him? It's actually a big dome almost, and so it works out to where if you sit up, and the rocks too, the rocks have some type of metal that really reflects sound. So if you sit at the top of this dome area, or this carved out, I can't think of the word, but if you sit at the top of it and you talk loud enough, you can hear throughout the whole area. And so it was really neat to kind of see how that works, and Pastor Randy taught through the Beatitudes, and it was really cool. There's another picture of the Sea of Galilee. This was the following day, I believe. Yeah, it was, where we went to Tel Dan. It was pretty cool. There wasn't a ton of stuff, I guess, biblical excavations, other than this one in the bottom right, which I'll get to. But this is the biggest spring. There's I think four springs that feed into the Jordan River. This is the biggest one. I think he said it feeds at 4,000 gallons a second. So it's a pretty large and very fast moving spring. This right here in the top right is the border of Lebanon. And one of the things that we'll get more to when we see the pictures of the Syrian border, this was the week after the attacks on Israel, the failed attacks, and then Israel's retaliations, and everybody was aren't you worried? You're probably not going to be able to go to the Golan Heights. I don't see any tanks I didn't see any tanks or infantrymen or anything when I was there. The warning, and I'll re-emphasize it when we get there, but the media over here takes things, and Pastor Randy talked about it when he was here last Saturday, about they said that there was a riot at the one of the gates, and he was sitting there as they were reporting this, watching a guy. He said the biggest, I guess, riot was a guy who didn't like the price of cucumbers. That was about it. Are there conflicts over there? Is there stuff happening? Absolutely. But don't let our news media make it seem way worse than it is. Now, they'll downplay what Israel did, because they said that Israel retaliated and destroyed 60 or some bunkers and Iranian bunkers and whatever in Syria. It was over 200. One of the other tour guides that was with us knows some people in the IDF that would know, and he said it was over 200 bunkers. So they'll overplay what the other countries are doing and then downplay what Israel does. This right here is one of the altars it's where one of the altars that I believe, King Jeroboam sacrificed golden calves at. And what they did is, when they found this, Hezekiah actually had it destroyed or deconstructed. And the guy that found it said, I don't know if I should rebuild this, because it wasn't exactly a good altar. So what they did is they actually took these pieces of metal and they made an outline of what it was, because they didn't want to rebuild it, which I think was really cool, kind of neat, and the right thing to do, probably. This was probably one of the oldest things we saw other than Jericho. This was a Canaanite gate that Abraham would have walked through, most likely. He didn't say, I walked through here, but they think that this is where Abraham would have walked through, because behind, where you guys are, that direction, there was a mountain that he came off of, and then it said he entered a Canaanite city. So unless he said, I don't like that gate, and walked all the way around to a different one, he walked through this gate. It was neat to see. This thing that they have over top of it is actually because they uncovered it and they started doing stuff, and then it rained, and they're like, the gate's disappearing. So they had to build a structure over top of it so that the rain didn't disintegrate this gate. And this actually, can you guys see the middle archway there? Okay. That actually used to be opened up, And Pastor Randy was actually in there when it was opened up. They had to close it off because it started to fall in a little bit, and it leaves it open, more tempting for tourists to kind of go and explore, I guess. So they had closed it off. So this, as I said, was this is the Syrian border, and again, now the one thing I will say is, so right here they've got this little trench, and off to, if you would have kept going that way, there was actually UN soldiers that were looking down over. You can't see it in this picture, but right over, well, actually, you can kind of see the outskirts. So this is the outskirts of of a town. Or actually, no. Yeah, you can see it. It's right there. This is a village that is not friendly toward Israel. And so there were UN soldiers there that were watching this village. And actually, and there might be no significance about it, but as Pastor Randy didn't teach that. He has another tour guide that goes with him by the name of Shlomo, which is the Hebrew name for Solomon. He was there, and he actually taught through this because he was there during the 1967 war. He was there through all that stuff, so it has a little more meaning to him, and it also gives Pastor Randy's voice a break. So as Shlomo was talking, I noticed that smoke kind of started to rise out from one of these cities, and odds are, I mean, it could have been that somebody left their oven on for too long. But I thought that was, I kind of noticed it, and then I looked around, and no one else seemed to notice it, but there was smoke coming from that village, so take your guesses on what that means. This is a sign they have. It was cool. Actually, around the other side, they have Washington, D.C., and it tells the distance to all these different places. Kind of neat. Picture worthy, I thought, at least. This was Beth Shean, Scythopolis, or Beit Shean, and I found this really cool effect that kind of make it look like it blended into the background of the picture. So I thought that was cool. I thought I'd do that. This was basically a Roman town that he took us to really get a glimpse of how the Romans thought, how they lived. This is the entrance to one of the theaters. This is me sitting on an ancient Roman toilet. So how these worked is they would have down here, they would have a flowing water, and then you would sit, and it was men and women would sit between these two. You don't sit on the little tablet. That doesn't go well. So you sit between the two tablets. And actually, this was where campaigning for politics would happen. You would go in, because this was a public event, and so you would go in and you would campaign, and you would they would sponsor the bathrooms. So you would pay so much for a toilet, and you get your name stuck on that toilet that says vote for whoever. It's a really foreign concept to us in America today, but there was actually but it was actually a really it would have been like I said, a very public area, because they actually I guess kind of where I would be standing in relevance to the picture, they had an open area, and there would be people playing music, and they would have like all different types of lavender and stuff, so it didn't smell as bad. Pastor Randy said so it would smell good. I don't believe that it really ever smelled good, but maybe not as bad. Oh man, you guys, okay, you guys still aren't as bad. There was a group of 3 people. One of them lives up in Cleveland area, Devin Barnes, and her and 2 other, guy and a girl, were just laughing hysterically the entire time because they couldn't, they got pictures and all sorts of stuff. So yeah, they were a riot, but it was a lot of fun going to the Roman bathroom. But this this town was actually destroyed in an earthquake. And you can see this is the original, this is how it was, the destruction of the town when these columns fell, how it just obliterated the earth. This was, let's see, this is one of the roads. Now there was actually, and I couldn't find the picture for whatever reason. So we're walking along, and I happened to look down and notice this brick, and it's got this square, a little circle in it, and then there's like 2 triangles that are pointed in. And I was like, I wonder what that is. I kept walking, and then Pastor Andy stopped in his tracks a little while later, and he goes, wait, there's a brick here somewhere. And he started to describe it, and I'm like, that's the brick. So like I started looking for it, and I ended up finding it. And what it was, it's the only brick like that and that they can find. And what it was is it was a station for the guys with the torches that would come out and say it's 11 o'clock and all is well, in Roman. So it was kind of neat. And I just was walking along. I was like, I wonder what that is. And then I was like, maybe I'll ask. And then I was like, it's probably nothing. And then it was something. So this is what amounts to a street sign. I can't remember who it was, but it's basically it's the street of someone. And they're like, well, how do you know? And Pastor Randy's response is always, well, it says it right here. I can't read that. I don't think anyone in here can. If you can, tell me what it says so I can clarify. But yeah, I thought it was interesting. Jericho, the oldest city in the world. This was a really cool place. So how it works when you go to Israel is you get off in Tel Aviv, and then you, if this is the West Bank, you go up, and then you go around, and then you go down into the desert, and then you come back up and around. So we're starting to go down here into the desert area in Jericho. This right here is an old cistern, and this right here is a different picture of the same old cistern. And then in the top right, I believe, yes, that is what they think is the oldest archaeological find in the world. It's a well from Jericho. And there's people that are saying that they're trying to date it much earlier than it actually is. Now, I will say that Pastor Randy takes the stance that the earth is not 6,000 years, but more probably in the 15 to 20,000 years old, because how we get 6,000 years is there was, I believe, a monk that tried to take the genealogies in Scripture and backdate them. But the genealogies in Scripture, like in Genesis, I believe it's 6, it's not a this person to this person to this person, but it actually, if you look at the Hebrew meanings of the names, it tells a story of the time leading up to that person. So the genealogies before Noah actually tell that, hey, there's going to be a flood and get ready, start building a boat. So there's a lot of flaw in that, and him doing archaeology and dating things and looking at things, he determines that it might be 15 to 20,000, which I didn't like at first, but then it's like, okay, he's not saying it's millions of years old because that's a stretch, but at the same time, there might be room for it to be a little bit older than 6,000. So my challenge to you is don't get hung up on 6,000 years. I know Ken Ham, who has an excellent ministry down there, he's very set on 6,000 years. And the bottom line is, I don't know. It might be 6,000, it might be 7,000, it might be 8,000, it might be 15,000. But I think we can all agree that it's not millions. It might be 6, it might be a little bit more, and I think we can kind of agree to disagree on that if you disagree. Qumran, which is where this little cave here is where they found one of the Dead Sea Scrolls. It was a shepherd boy was throwing rocks, and he heard a different noise, kind of a crash. So somehow he climbed up in there and found it. I don't really know how, but or someone did. Maybe I don't know if he did, but somebody climbed up in there and found the Dead Sea Scrolls. This was the Dead Sea. I thought I had some more pictures. Maybe not. Thought I had some more pictures of the area, but I guess not. This is the Dead Sea. So Pastor Randy talks about the Dead Sea. There was a volcano that was active around the area of the Dead Sea back in the time of Sodom and Gomorrah. So where this picture is taken, if you were to keep going back this direction, you would find a huge graveyard. Excuse me. Generally, when you have a graveyard, you have a city next to it. There's no city anywhere close. So what Pastor Randy thinks is there was a volcano eruption that had contained a lot of salt. So you have magmic salt, I don't know if that's the right word, molten salt that's spewing over Sodom and Gomorrah. And so when it says that, and actually when it says, this is kind of a fun fact, when it says that Lot's wife turned around, we think that, we read it in the West and we think she turned to look back at her past. What it actually means, they don't think of their past as behind you. They think of their past as in front of you because you can see your past. So the future is behind you because it's unknown. So when she looked back, she was saying, I don't know what my future holds. And that's why God said, don't turn back. Trust in me that your future is in my hands. So in a lack of trust to God, she turned back, and then what happened most likely is a huge piece of molten salt fell on her and she turned to salt. But that also would explain, now the Dead Sea, Pastor Eddie said that might explain the salt content in the Dead Sea, maybe a little bit, but in Genesis I believe it talks about the Salt Sea and the wars between, and when Abraham went and saved Lot. It talked about the kingdom of the Salt Sea. So I don't know, and Pastor Andy talks a lot because of what he does, so sometimes he might misspeak here and there, so I wouldn't get hung up on that. I'm not saying he's a false teacher or anything like that. He might have misspoke. Even Pastor Steve has to have a department of corrections occasionally. Sorry. This was Masada. What time is it? How are we doing on time? Okay. So this is Masada. This is where Herod built this as kind of a getaway to the desert. And he never lived there. He built it and never went there. Which, if you've been to Masada, if any of you, who here has been to Israel? Has anyone in here actually been? Okay, did you go to Masada? Okay, I think you might agree with me that based on the location, I don't know that I would ever want to live there because it's super hot and dry. I would go more for the Jerusalem area where it's kind of cool at night. It's not so dry. That's just me. But he built this. The only people that ever really lived there was, so Rome came, conquered Israel, the temple fell, but there was a remnant of Jews that actually came to Masada. Real quick, this is a beautiful mosaic of an area where they have no idea what this was, because they had their warm bath, they had their cool bath, and then they had this one. So our tour guide, Shlomo, was like, what do you guys think this is for? And everybody was giving out answers. He goes, you're all really close. I have no idea. So they don't know what it is, but they know there's a nice, beautiful mosaic there. This is looking out from Masada. And so this is where I'll go into the story that I started to tell. So the temple fell, and there was a group of Jews that came and lived in Masada. Now, and I would agree in this thinking, you would think that Rome conquers Israel. If there's a group of, say, 800 Jews living in the middle of the desert, that's probably fine. Rome wasn't going to have it. One of the big things about Rome is they don't even let the tiniest little bit of pushback, rebellion, anything, because of the chance that might grow. So Rome brought out soldiers, and they have what's called the snake path, which is the only way, because they didn't have cable cars back then. Let me see. Yeah, so this is the cable car, these cables right here. They didn't have that back then, obviously. So what they did is they decided that they couldn't get their battering ram up. And this right here in these squares is Roman camps. I don't know if you can kind of see. And then all around here, these are the walls. They actually built these in the process of trying to figure out how they're going to get up there to Masada. Well, what they did, and you can kind of see the edge of it right in here, they built a ramp from the bottom all the way up so that they could get their battering ram in. So the Jews that were living there started to notice, and they decided that what they were going to do is because it would be worse it would be better to die by fellow Jews than by the Romans. So they took about a group of 10 men, they drew a lottery, and they picked about 10 men, and those 10 men were to kill off everyone in the camp, and then down to the very last one who would kill those 9 other guys, and then he would be the one to kill himself. Suicide in Judaism is a very dishonoring thing, and in Israel, it's a very honor-shame society. So this was a very big deal. And what had actually ended up happening is the Romans built this big ramp, got their battering ram up, and then everyone in there was dead. And it was a very tragic, just heartbreaking story. And you could tell because Shlomo is actually Jewish. And so you could just kind of tell that even today that it's a hard story for him to share. But it really is, it's just kind of a solemn spot now because it's in the middle of the desert. There's nothing. It's just dry. And then you hear that this is the spot where about 800 Jews had decided that it was better to die by the hands of fellow Jews than to die by the pig-eating pagan Romans. This is some more of the just excavations in Masada. This is Beersheba, or Tel Sheva, which would have been, if you're familiar with, in Genesis, when Abraham is making the deal with, I'm going to forget his name, it is Abimelech, and he's making a deal with these wells. Beersheba, Beer means well, Sheva means either 7 or to swear an oath. And so if you read the story in Genesis, that's what they're doing. They're making an oath over these wells. So there was a big disagreement. But this was a spot where Abraham dwelt there in Genesis 22:19. He made a covenant of peace, or made a covenant with Abimelech at that place in Genesis 21:32. The Lord spoke to both Isaac and Jacob at Beersheba in Genesis 26:23 and Genesis 46:1. So it's a very significant as far as the Old Testament Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob go. This was actually the well. This is the well of Abraham. They think this is the well that Abraham made a deal with Abimelech or Avimelech over. This right here, so I'll go with the first 2 pictures on the right first, are just some excavations of basically little huts in the town. The Old Testament villages were really odd because they were just kind of almost one-room home type deals, but there was just a bunch of little small ones, and then it was kind of interesting how it all worked. But this right here was one of the most uncertain walks down because it's this stone stairway and it goes down for a little while. What it was an old cistern where soldiers could access the town through that cistern. But it was kind of neat. We walked down in there and saw the rock formation, which actually the rock under there is like chalk. So you've got your archways down in the cistern, and if you reach up and you just touch, I mean, you can just scrape off layers of the rock, so to speak. The next day, and I've skipped some of the sites because some of the sites we saw were more to talk about modern day Israel, which is beautiful to see, but for the sake of time, I wanted to stick to some of the other stuff. This was and I have it in quotes because they call it the Garden of Gethsemane. There was no garden. It was an olive grove. So what happened is they said, this is where the Garden of Gethsemane must have been. Why is it an olive grove? Christians. And the Jewish people were like, because it wasn't a garden. And they said, all right, well, let's plant flowers so that it can be the Garden of Gethsemane. So they planted flowers, and now we have a beautiful garden. And an olive grove. This was the church. I can't remember what the church was called. Yeah, I can't find it. This is a church where they remember Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, and this was it was a very emotional. I don't want to make you guys think that I had an emotional experience. It was very moving to be in the olive grove that Jesus would have been praying in. This is just some more of the trees. I've heard it said that these are the trees that Jesus prayed at, and it's like, or it could not be. Some more old trees. This is in the old city of Jerusalem. This is Hezekiah's wall, and what's left of it, at least. I have two little sisters that were watching me put the slideshow together, and they're like, seems kind of short for a wall. And so I had to explain to them that all of these are just what's left of this stuff. So that was kind of funny. This is the Western Wall. This, for me, I didn't know how to handle the Western Wall, to be completely honest with you guys. You can see these are some of my classmates. Well, that's my buddy Josh right there. Some of them went up, put their hands on, put cards in, and prayed at the wall. I didn't know how I felt about that. And I still don't know if it's right to go and pray at the Western Wall. So erring on the side of caution, I just stayed back and recognized that this is what the Jews have left of the temple. This is where they go and kind of in place of the temple for right now. And so in that sense, it was really cool. It was really exciting to see. And actually off to the right here, that's the beginning of what is a bar mitzvah. So we got to see the beginning of it, but for the sake of time, we couldn't stick around to watch this kid's birthday party. I almost had a really bad experience here. I usually carry a pocket knife with me. I had it in my pocket, and you have to walk through metal detectors. And my tour guide went in ahead of me, and I realized it, and so I called him over, and I was like, what do I do with this? And it was shlomo. And so he got really worried because he's like, you cannot have this here. So he told me to just put it in my pocket and walk through, and luckily the metal detectors somehow didn't go off. No one checked me. And of course I walked out, and I mean, there was dudes with assault rifles everywhere. And I'm like, okay, all right. But luckily I made it in, and I didn't carry a pocket knife with me the rest of the trip because I was terrified. This is just more of Janae's aesthetically pleasing pictures. This was, and I got to give Pastor Randy a hard time for getting his finger in the picture. I noticed that, and I thought, come on, Pastor Randy. But yeah, this is our picture looking over Jerusalem. Of course, you can see the Dome of the Rock, which I didn't know this, but actually isn't a mosque. I've always been told it's a mosque, but it's actually just a place of remembrance for the Muslims. This is some of the stones of the temple. If you guys have Bibles with pictures in them, you've probably seen this picture before of the huge stones, and they are enormous. I mean, Pastor Randy is actually kind of a tall guy, and he's almost as tall as one of the stones. This is looking down on, and you can see the destruction that happened of the temple when things fell. And these, okay, so you see the lines in the side of the temple walls. There's two lines that go through it. Somebody was like, what's the significance of those lines? Well, before they excavated all of this, they actually stuck plumbing through it because they dug down, they drilled their lines out, they put plumbing in. And then years later, because the bottom one, or I think it was the top one was the original, years later they said, we want plumbing. They drilled a hole, not knowing that the top one was there that they could have reused. They drilled a hole, put their plumbing in, and then years later, they realized, oh, there's the temple here. So they excavated it, and now they have these nice two plumbing lines in the middle of the walls there. This gives you an idea of how massively tall the temple is, and this is, I think, it's either half or a third of the original height. The temple was enormous, and because, I mean, you're standing there looking at it, and then he says, okay, double it, and you're like, man, that's got to be pretty tall. massive structure. I mean, really no other words. This is sitting at the, and I got to find the name of this gate. But this is at one of the gates looking down over Jerusalem. I'm not going to be able to find it quickly. If you want to know what the name of the gate is, this is our notebook that he gave us going into the trip. And so it's got all the places we went and stuff, but to try to follow through and flip through all that would be too difficult. So I'm looking at the summaries here. This is what looks like a mural, but is actually a piece of wallpaper that is it was basically an old Byzantine era road, and then it led up to this wall. But does anyone notice anything different about this mural? And if you've been to Israel with Pastor Randy and he's pointed it out to you, Steve, you're not allowed to tell. Does anyone notice anything weird about this picture? Okay, I'm going to break the fence here. You see this kid down here? He's dressed in modern clothing. So the idea of the wallpaper mural is to get the idea that you're walking down this road and then you continue on into the Byzantine era style of how things would have been. So they use this little boy with backwards ball cap and modern clothing on, which I actually noticed as we first walked up. He talked for a little while, and I was like, the heck is that little kid doing there? And then he explained it. So I don't know. I have a knack of noticing things before they get explained and wondering what they are, I guess. This is the pools of Bethsaida. This is where the paralytic was laying there and wanted the angel would come and stir up the pools, and the guy was like, I can't get there, because it was a lack of trust thing. If he rolled in and didn't get healed, he would sink to the bottom because he was paralyzed, so it's hard to swim. And so these pools are enormously deep too, so it's not like a 10-foot pool where somebody might even be able to jump in and pull you out. I mean, if you go, you're going. So it was more of a trust thing, because the guy would say the first person who jumps in is healed, but the second, it wasn't that it would only heal one person, it was that everyone else was terrified to jump in. So the first guy would go and then no one else would. And so it was more about a trust thing than a timing thing, because if you read it and you think, oh, well, he's just too slow, then it kind of, like, okay, so what does that matter to me? The principle is you have to trust God, as simple as that sounds. This is just some pictures of the roads in the old city. This is in the Jewish quarter. We walked through the Arab quarter, and I wish I would have got a picture. I don't like crowds and a lot of people. I'm more of a, out in the middle of nowhere type guy. There was so many people in these tiny little roads that, it was hard to move. When Pastor Randy talked about last week, when he was in Jerusalem and he said that there's so many people and it's hard to move, I was there with him, and he was exactly right. I was like, because I'm trying to watch out for everyone else in the group too, to make sure no one gets pickpocketed. I'm trying to watch out for myself. I'm trying to maneuver. It doesn't smell good. That was one of the things. It really smells bad. It was just kind of an uncomfortable experience for me, because I like quiet and not a ton of people and space. That's one thing. In America, we have our bubble. That's not in Israel. It's not uncommon to just move someone out of line in Israel. So it was interesting. I was actually trying to get onto an escalator, and I would go, and then these church ladies would just be knocking me out of the way. And it took me forever to just get on an escalator that is from here to there, and they just kept bumping me out of the way. Whatever. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and this was one of the. I had such mixed emotions about this, because it's a church where they remember the death and resurrection of Jesus, yet we know that that we actually had to sprint out of there because they were holding a mass and we would have been blocked in. And the mixed emotions are, obviously, it's so exciting that this is the place where they actually think that Jesus was died and resurrected, or at least they remember it. And they actually think, Pastor Randy thinks, because there's a tomb in here, that this would have been more along the lines of the tomb where Jesus was laid in. And I'll show you pictures of the garden tomb because he took us both places. But so on one hand, it's really exciting, but on the other, it's so sad to see that, and the Catholicism side of things. I don't want to say that everyone in Catholicism can't be saved, but at the same time, if you follow the teachings and the practices of Rome, you're going to have a tough time making a case to me that you are following the true gospel. And so to see all these people, I mean, hundreds, if not thousands of people packed in here worshiping the wrong Jesus, and it's so sad to see. It was, like I said, words are hard to come by when describing my experience in Israel all around, and specifically this place, because there's such a two extremes of excitement and sadness. This is just some of the pictures inside. This is the Damascus Gate, which was coming out of the Arab quarter, and I mean, you can kind of see the amount of people, but they were everywhere inside of there. And like I said, I didn't particularly care for it. It was the Arab quarter too, which made me a little bit uncomfortable. Not that I dislike Arabs, but knowing what they believe and how they feel about my beliefs, and it's a little bit of an uncomfortable experience. This was the garden tomb. So it's actually a British group that decided that this must be where Jesus was raised. So this is pictures of the tomb. I don't know. Can you guys see the girl's head sitting right there? I don't know if you can, but if you can, that's Brandy. She's super cool. This is, again, just pictures of the tomb. May or may not be where Jesus was buried. Might be, might not be. It's not a matter of where. That's one of the things they kept telling us. It's not a matter of where. It's that he was. It's not a matter of where he was buried and resurrected. It's a matter that he was buried and was resurrected. Where'd you go? What happened? I don't know what happened. Oh, all right. We're going to go back to make it professional. I just wanted to end on this note. Psalm 122:6. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May they prosper who love you. Yeah, I mean, that's it right there. We need to be praying for Israel and for the Jews, obviously. There is a lot of chaos, not as much as maybe they play it up to be, but at the bottom line is, and I forgot to touch on this, when you're in Jerusalem, it's very hard to focus. Because I said there's a spiritual tension throughout the land, but specifically on Jerusalem, there's a certain amount of just tension. Pastor Randy, when he lived there, would actually have to leave to go out to the wilderness to pray because he couldn't focus. All I can say is pray. And I want to end again by saying thank you guys so much for supporting me with your prayers financially. It means so much to me that I got to do this year. Truly, this was the greatest 10 months of my life, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without you guys. So I'm going to close in prayer, and then I think we'll be done. So, Heavenly Father, you are truly an amazing God, and I thank you so much for the people, the church that you've blessed me with, the opportunities this year that you've blessed me with, just the ability to sit under an amazing Bible teacher, study 1,189 chapters of your word, and then go to the place where a lot of it was written and see the places that the stuff happened and experience the stuff that I experienced. Thank you for the people that I met this year, the friends that I made. And God, I recognized that if it wasn't for you blessing me with the people at this church, it probably wouldn't have happened. God, I thank you. I want to pray for Israel. I want to pray for Jerusalem. Pray for peace over there, God. It seems like a hard thing to pray for because we're excited about the possibility of being in the end times, but at the same time, God, ultimately we pray for peace in Jerusalem. God, I thank you for all the dads in the room and the dads in this church, and I thank you for my dad. I thank you that he's raised me to be at least somewhat of a good young man, and I just pray that you would be with us as we go out this week. Help us to just live sold out and wholly surrendered for you. In Jesus' name, amen.